thought we'd do something different from what others are doing. Other than mainly describing a future, we thought we'd mainly describe how to get there, with only little bits about the future. Because I think actually we know what's wrong, we've got a pretty good idea what to do, we haven't got the faintest idea how to get there. So we thought we'd talk about how other industries do this thing, which is change, and how they do change in such a way as change gets pulled into institutions, rather than we spend all our time running a system where you push change at institutions and wonder why it doesn't stick. So what are the dynamics from now into the year 2023 that might construct more pull into pull of change into an institution? And this sort of the big picture analogy we're going to use is the battle between new and old business models. Again, we know what the old business model is, we know what the new business model is. We may not necessarily call it that, but let's call it, for the purpose of this afternoon, a business model. And let's look at how business models clash and how the old is beaten by the new. And I use that word completely deliberately. This is not about getting around the table and working something out. This is about conflict. It's a conflict between the old and the new. It's not necessarily all about conflict. There's a lot of cooperation in it, but there is some conflict. So we'll be talking about how that conflict takes place. And Mike is going to be talking about a lot of examples from other industries. The integrated outcomes that actually nearly all of the models we heard about this morning and heard about this afternoon are a very different model. We actually at the moment are thinking about what outcomes are like. But if any of you are trying to do this, and some of us are trying to do it in various bits of the National Health Service, going to a provider and saying we're now going to judge on outcomes is really, really radically different from talking to them about unintegrated and fragmented inputs. This is not a little change, this is a very large change. And that's what really we mean by the new business model. Because the challenge of the new business model is it fractures, again a very tough word, but I mean it fractures the current organisational responsibilities that are there. Because those organisational responsibilities are essentially built around fragmentation. Not secondarily built around fragmentation, but essentially built around fragmentation. So if you want to construct integrated care, you have to essentially change the nature of those organisational responsibilities. So these are not little things, and that's why everybody talks about disruptive innovation, but they really don't want their innovations to disrupt. We really want these innovations to disrupt because we think that's absolutely essential if you're going to get integrated outcome-based care. We start in 2013 with a very small number of commissioners looking at constructing this new model, and they are. And a very small number of commissioners pushing through this new model. And we say, therefore, and this is a big deep breath, we say this new model will be born, is being born, and will grow. There will be, absolutely certainly, pressures for this model to grow. There will be value for money pressures, but there will also be, we are used in the National Health Service to essentially seeing patients as conservative in terms of change. In this case, they need not be so. In this case, there are patient groups around the country that rather passionately don't like fragmented care. They rather passionately don't like disjointed care. And if you look at the Richmond group of patient organisations, they are talking very coherently about what a different model of care is. One of the pulls we're suggesting in this particular change process is through those organisations, saying if you can do it in X and actually have a decent outcome-based care, why can't you do it in other places, and actually to have organisations doing that. One concrete example is Macmillan are paying quite a lot of money working in Staffordshire and Stoke as commissioners to commission an outcome-based cancer service and an outcome-based end-of-life service. If Macmillan do that, they are an organisation which will start demanding that new business model in other parts of the country. They're not going to sit back and say, ooh, that looks pretty. They're going to be starting to demand that. So part of this is there is a possibility of a demand pull of a new model of care. If we roll forward to 2023 in terms of old and new, we are not starry-eyed. We do not think the new model of care, this after all is the NHS, will have replaced the old model of care. I think it's almost certain that the old model of care will be there, will be consuming, let's say, 40% of the resources and delivering 30% of the patient care. And it will be doing so within the old boundaries of organisations because they'll be protected. Because there will be conflict between these new and old business models. Some of you looking around there, some of you almost my age, can think back to as supermarkets came in, the old model of retail said, old people won't be able to cope with supermarkets, they'll die and it'll be your fault. Does that sound familiar? Old people won't be able to cope with new models of care, they'll die and it'll be your fault. The conflict between the old and the new will be sort of like that. It will be sharp. It will be pretty, and so there'll be parts of the NHS that will not be changed. Because actually 10 years is not a very long period of time. There'll be a part of the NHS which we think will be getting outcome-based incentivised care, and there'll be another business model of which we do not know that will come in about the year 2020, and which will be developing probably very, very intensely digitally based care. So our vision of 2023 is 3 business models. Existing, not nicely, but existing side by side, because that's the pace of change that will exist within the National Health Service. It's not like other industries where the new wipes out the old, because we don't have much of a failure regime. Just 2 or 3 general things about what that business model is, because the certainty is, in 2023 we're looking at many more high acuity people than we've got at the moment. That seems to be the hallmark of the nature of healthcare. That if therefore we look at the current value proposition for how we deal with high acuity patients and we roll that forward, the system is bust. That seems to be what this conference is about. And so what are we doing differently in a new model of care? And I think there's 3 things, and Mike will talk about all of these from other industries. The first is we are beginning to, and by 2023 we may have got hold of the fact that patients can be producers of value, rather than as we see at the moment, which is sponges of value. They just sponge up value rather than produce it. In other industries, Mr. Tesco's, I co-produce a lot of value. And that's what I do. I didn't used to, but I do now. And people with long-term conditions, we know, can co-produce a lot of value. But actually, they're not seen as that. So when we're asked to talk about who are the providers in the year 2023, actually, if I'm right, it's patients. There's others, but it's patients, because they are co-producing some care. And to do that, we need to recognise that the main location of care at the moment is the home. It's not care close to home, it's actually in the home. That's where care takes place. It doesn't take place very well, often takes place very bad. But we need to construct the home as the locus of efficient healthcare. That's recognising what happens at the moment, but it's making it more efficient. And to do that, we need a value chain, so we need home and patients adding value. We then need a coherent value chain of the different things that happen at the moment. Whereas at the moment what you have is a bit of value added, it evaporates. Another bit of value added, it evaporates. There is no chain that holds that value together. Other industries, again, have value chains. We don't, we have value and evaporation. So how you construct a value chain, again, other industries manage to do it. And the third thing is, it's very interesting when you talk to people in health, and not just in this country, talk to people in health. The problem is we have fixed and variable costs, which means you can't change anything. And actually, in our industry, fixed costs are fixed by God. You are not allowed to touch them. You're not allowed to move fixed costs to variable costs, because that's naughty. Whereas other industries, the sole aim of what you're doing there is to move fixed to variable costs, then you've got things to do. But we somehow mustn't do that because we believe passionately in owning everything, which means we end up with a large lot of fixed costs. So this is the way in which value is changed. You find new sources of value in patients and homes, you find a value chain which adds value together rather than ceasing to dissipate, and you change the relationship between fixed and variable costs, and then you have more room to play with. And Mike's going to talk about how other industries have done that. And then some examples.
Thank you. So these examples that you've got in the paper, I'll mention briefly, all come from my direct experience, which shows how old I really am, nearly as old as Paul. The first caveat is that I do actually think the NHS and healthcare is different to any market I've operated in before. That's not to say some of these experiences are relevant, but it's different in two respects. One, it's pretty much an industry rather than an organisation. Two, the criticality of the service means that you can't allow for discontinuity in the path from good to better. So those are significant challenges. But there's still some good relevant experiences from different industries, so picking out a few. So if we look at Volkswagen first. So Volkswagen Audi, same as all car industry operators, had multiple sites, a different automotive plant per car, per model, and various sub-assembly activities. What they did was to push their sub-assembly down to their parts suppliers, who then bundled and delivered straight into the final assembly plant. The other thing they did, because of that, they were able to create assembly plants that covered multiple models. So not just different finishes, the gear and the GL, but different cars, different platforms, cars and vans in one platform. So down in Barcelona, out in Mexico, etc. And they did that by pushing down activity to their value chain, but then integrating it and using an integrator to pull it together so that when it came to the assembly plant, the guy in the assembly plant would turn around and there were the bits in preformed assembly for the next car that came down or van that came down the production line. Mazda spent a couple of years trying to make something inefficient efficient. So they were trying to reconcile this task of reconciling purchase orders with supplier invoices. And in the end they said, you know what, we shouldn't have to reconcile. People should deliver what we order. So instead of making something inherently flawed more efficient, they cut to the nub and said we don't want it like that. Another example in our paper which may seem to struggle to see resonance in is BHS in their supply chain for a t-shirt had a time period of 4 seasons, a year and a quarter, from concept to that product being on the shelf. And surprise, surprise, they had lots of unavailability of different colours and sizes, they had lots of markdowns, etc. They analysed that supply chain all the way through that period and found that 80% of the time, nothing was happening. Somebody was waiting for something else. So they said, okay, we'll take out all of those waiting points and just join the whole thing up, and it reduced it to a season. So they could know what was selling, what was fashion. So if we look at a patient's pathway, how much time is spent waiting for something and what can go wrong in a lengthy wait for a procedure. There's other industry changes that are kind of imposed or kind of forced by competitive innovation that fundamentally challenge the structure of an industry. And I guess the big difference that I see between other industries and health is that the cost of change is far less relevant than creating a sustainable future. So change will be embraced as an imperative, because if that organisation doesn't change, the rest of the industry does, they're left behind, or they don't get their competitive advantage from bringing their new innovation. So people much more readily write off the existing to create the new. So we can look at that in the beer industry. So those who are old enough remember the vertical integration of the beer industry pre-1992, where the brewers owned the pubs. And you only got that brewer's product in that pub. Imposed change, every brewer had to sell half of their pubs above 2,000. The implications of that was fundamental to the way that industry organised itself. And pretty much overnight, we got brewers who only brewed, and we got retailers that only ran pubs. The whole infrastructure had to transform. And I guess in many ways, when I look at the parallels across the health, Paul mentioned Tesco, the kind of grocery transformation is most interesting. So, I don't know if anyone else can remember, a little bit like the two Ronnies with the I want some O's. Remember that gag? And you'd stand in the shop and the products would come to you. People would fetch and carry to you. And the whole concept of you going out of town to a retail park Now, we've seen the evolution that's happened, and we've hated it, haven't we? We've kind of abused Tesco and others all the way through. We've said you're destroying our high streets, you're taking away our experience, you're destroying our Sundays, and yet we can't get enough of it. And when you think about that, it kind of says, well, if we wait for consensus, will change happen at all? It's very much in the kind of Apple mode of I kind of know what you want and I'll build it for you and you will come. So the interesting bit then about that kind of high street to retail park evolution is that they then created convenience stores. So I'm sure we're all using them now, convenience stores. Yet that was the product that was uneconomic, that was unviable. And so people said, well, you must have to charge more for the convenience of the high street. No, same price, same product range. And then they've created a home delivery product where it comes to you. Same basket of goods as is typical in a store. People say, well, you've got to pay more for that, surely, because the costs of production are much greater to get it to the home. Nope, same price. And essentially it's because of the leverage of the synergy across that infrastructure. So we can create different propositions that draw on synergy, that can deliver the product that the customer wants at a price point that makes sense. And I guess the final piece about the Tesco revolution that I think stands out most of all to me is the club card. So those that remember Green Shield stamps, the club card came along as what's that all about? How's that going to get a grip? And I guess because they didn't wait to, Malcolm's analogy, elephants again, they didn't wait to eat the elephant as a whole. They gradually evolved the club card. So today, Tesco will know more about us than the NHS will know about us as patients. And they don't just sit on that information, they use it. They've redesigned their model, they redesigned their ranges in the stores, the way they cluster products, new products they bring through, and customised to you. So when you get your offer from Tesco, your £10 of vouchers, whatever it may be, it's not a random £10 of vouchers, it's vouchers for what you buy. So it's an information system designed around us. So Paul said to me, well, what kind of innovative disruption might a new provider bring to the NHS if the market was open, if you really could drive it? So we look at our experience and we say, well, there's a guy called Darzi around not so long ago, and that weren't a bad vision. So genuinely, truthfully, if the market was open, if customers were empowered to make their choice, we would create a form of that polyclinic type of solution. It would be combined in a hub and spoke kind of way with existing supply in either a federated or an owned model with local outlets. It will be backed up by a customer management system that gave an individual account manager per member of the public. It would have a bricks and clicks type of structure, so you could access on an FAQ basis, you could access to your account owner, your account manager, you could access to a lead clinician either by telephone or by internet or by email. It's all doable, it's all there now. And if I look at that range of solutions, pretty much all of that, somewhere in the country today, we provide that service. But if we were allowed to invest that risk because we knew the customers were allowed to come, we'd build it, we'd take it to market. And I guess the big question from Paul's opener is, what impact would that have on the existing market system? How much activity would it take out of the hospital system? What would you do with that redundant capacity? Volume goes down, unit cost goes up. Unacceptable formula. What are the implications? Because, back to some of our examples, change is tough and it needs that imperative often to grasp it. So, the view on fixed costs that I take, that industry generally takes, is that there is no such thing as a fixed cost. There are costs that are more difficult and expensive to get out than others, but they're all variable. Everything is variable. Paul.
Okay, and just in a sense to take some of those, and draw some concrete conclusions from that. If you look at what happened with the out-of-store Tesco's and the destruction of the small mum-and-pop store, is something like the NHS says what we do is we need size. It then says, actually no, size isn't the only thing, because you can then have convenience stores in the locality, providing the product is linked to the size. Then you can have it at home, because it's linked to the size. So in a sense, the experience of the consumer is more home-based, even though the organisation is larger. Whereas what I think what we tend to say to patients is, if we size up the hospital, you'll have to 20 miles, you have to go 20 miles to the hospital. Funny enough, they don't want to do that. If you said, if you size up the hospital will come to your home, that's a different sort of proposition. So we actually get some of the vision of these things, but usually not the thing that's centred around what the customer will go for. And then when we explain to the patients, they say, no, we don't want that, because the thing we're explaining to them isn't very wantable. It's very much an industry organising itself, but not around the customers. And just the last point about what Mike says 2 or 3 times as he's going through, and it's a phrase that we use a lot, which is that we need supply chain managers. I mean, we do need supply chain managers, and patients need care coordinators. The way in which we construct care coordinators at the moment is somebody else needs to coordinate the care coordinators. There's somebody else in the chain. They're not sort of above the chain, because the care coordinator can't tell the orthopaedic surgeon what to do. The orthopaedic surgeon tells the care coordinator what to do. If in a supply chain manager, someone building a bit of the shard tells the supply chain manager of the shard what to do, they don't build the shard. That's part of the supply chain, is you are organised by the supply chain manager, however important you are. And at the moment, the people we're putting in to organise the patient pathway supply chain do not have the status to organise that patient pathway supply chain.